Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we return to a very important theme, and that is the latest developments in the UAP Disclosure Act that is working its way through the reconciliation process in the U.S. Congress, and also note some of the developments in Hollywood with the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. But before we dive into that subject, I want to just catch up a little with ourselves. We've covered some extraordinary issues over the last several weeks. Last week on artificial intelligence, and you'll see in the news it's with the meltdown of OpenAI and the firing of Sam Altman. And now today, just a few minutes ago, over 500 employees demanding the board resign and that Sam be reinstated as CEO. You have a wonderful juxtaposition between the kind of the rationality and the scientific optimism with regards to artificial intelligence and the primitive nature of human nature as we grapple with politics and he said, she says, and who done it and who's to blame and court intrigue that seems to plague the human race far more persistently and with far more effect than anything that we conceive with our rational minds. And I wanted to just note that today as we begin, because there's some extremely deep complexities happening out of the primitive nature of our humanity that is clouding our capacity to move into the future in a straightforward, positive way. You know, it was only just a few months ago where when the issue of the war in Ukraine was front and center for the entire human race. And then all of a sudden comes the Middle East and the extraordinary attack on Israel on October 7th, and then the horrendous counterattack by Israel on Gaza that we have been also contemplating. And I wanted to just note these two because there's so much that needs to be said for us to understand both the deeper layers of Gaza and the deeper layers of what's going on in Ukraine, as rather than working together to shape the human future, we're deconstructing ourselves and fighting. And that's just what happened with the company that was bringing out the extraordinary developments for the next generation of artificial intelligence. What we're witnessing is a complete meltdown of the people, demonstrating once again that it is the complexities and dysfunctions of the human psyche, far more than the technology that our psyche in some of its more sober moments can create. That is the real challenge if we're going to enable humanity to rise. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, even around the UFO issue, now the UAP issue, unidentified anomalous phenomena. But I just want to note how the primitive nature of humankind plagues every single human endeavor, bar none. Doesn't matter whether you're in the Vatican or you're in the inner circle of the Dalai Lama or you're on some extraordinary living intentional community in New Mexico or in Bali. Human nature everywhere is the same. And that is the major part of the human predicament. I want to just look ahead for the week. This is the week where in the United States they celebrate Thanksgiving on Thursday. So I'm aware that there's a big holiday coming up, but Humanity Rising has a policy of just persevering whatever the holidays, because if we took one holiday off, we would have to take all of them off. So what we do is we are closing down this year for a holiday break, a winter break on the 15th of December. And then we'll come back again at the end of the first week of January, as we've been always doing. And then we'll move forward into the new year. And we'll take another break during August, which is a holiday time for most people. And I just wanted to say that on Thursday, or rather on Tuesday, tomorrow, and Wednesday, we're going to be hearing from a group of people that trace their lineage back to the Mayflower and have done extraordinary research on that first Thanksgiving, and have some very deep insights into some of the complexities that took place in those early days of the Europeans coming to North America that shaped what we now understand to be Thanksgiving. And then on Thursday, I thought I would take some time to really go into some of the deeper layers of what's going on in Gaza. Because what's going on in Gaza needs to be understood, because what's going on is of biblical proportions and affects us all. And then on Friday, I'll be giving an update on what's been transpiring in Ukraine. There's been very dramatic developments in Ukraine that haven't been covered by the mainstream news. But of course, that doesn't make them any less real. So on Thursday and Friday of this week, I'll be sharing in a more extended way. Normally, I do these very short openings, which I like to do to get everybody kind of into the day, and then we take the subject at hand. But I feel that with these major historical unfoldings, like the Israeli war on Gaza, and the war in Ukraine, we really need to understand more comprehensively, and that takes a little bit more time. So on Thursday and Friday, I know it's Thanksgiving for many Americans. I'll be present for that time. So now we want to turn to really the major subject of our day. Even though we're preoccupied with our own stupidities, vanities, and wars, there has been something percolating in the US government over the last number of years that is leading to arguably the most important legislation in history, and that is the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act, which is now working its way, as I said, through the reconciliation process between the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress toward final writing, and hopefully to be embedded in the National Defense Authorization Act, which should be passed in mid-December for President Biden's signature on or about the 20th of December. That's why I'm in Washington now, working with the New Paradigm Institute, although I continue with Ubiquity University, as you all know, and continue convening Humanity Rising. But one of the people that I've met here in Washington, and I've come to count as a good friend and colleague, is Stephen Bassett, who has been involved with the UFO, UAP issue for many decades, as Dan Sheehan and Stephen Greer and Richard Dolan and other luminaries in this field who've been recognizing the inordinate importance of disclosure and have been working tirelessly, as Steve has, with the Paradigm Research Group, which he formed to look at some of the implications of UFO disclosure, and more recently has been a co-founder of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, as Hollywood burgeons with all kinds of movies and documentaries about the UFO UAP issue. Stephen also lives here in Washington, so we've been making each other's acquaintance. And so, Steve, I want to invite you to turn on your video and take yourself off mute. His office is in the National Press Club, not too far away, a few blocks north of the White House. So, Steve, welcome to Humanity Rising. And why don't we just begin with anything that you would like to share about the importance of the UAP issue, and then tell us a little bit more about the Paradigm Research Group, and then more recently, the formation of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance.
Certainly. Good morning, Jim. It's great to be with you. But first of all, my office is in the National Press Building. The Press Club is on the 13th floor, which I belong to. And it is a longtime organization that has done more from a journalistic standpoint to support the, how would you say, the disclosure activist movement than any other entity. There have been, I don't know, 15, 20 press conferences held there, conferences as well as the citizen hearing on disclosure. The National Press Club is a treasure, and they also have a free taco night on Friday, which is really good. So there's that. And then the other thing I want to mention is this. The issue that we're discussing has actually been percolating in the public domain for about the same length of time as the civil rights effort to get the Civil Rights Act percolated in the public domain, roughly from the end of the failure of Reconstruction until the signing of the Civil Rights Act in '64. It's about the same length of time. It's around 76 years. And what is happening now is, after all of this effort, the United States government is finally elected to respond to the demand of the citizens. In this case, it's a significant portion of the public, with the appropriate action. Just like the administration of Johnson responded to the Civil Rights Act, a request, a need for a Civil Rights Act, by signing that bill in 1964. So that's kind of what's going on. Now, in this case, it is the culmination of an activist movement like no other. One of the most interesting, intriguing, and in some ways difficult activist movement like no other, in that with every other activist movement of the 20th century, and there were many of them, and it was one of the great activist centuries because there were a lot of democratic countries and a lot of opportunity for people to protest and demand things from their government. The disclosure activist movement was trying to get something acknowledged that the government said did not exist. It would be like the civil rights movement trying to end segregation, and the formal policy of the United States government is there is no segregation anywhere in the country. It doesn't exist. That's an illusion, and you're crazy for thinking that. That's what we had to deal with for 76 years since Roswell.
Good analogy. I like that. I like that.
So that is breaking right now, and I'll get into that. And I also want to point something else out, because you brought up AI. It's a side thing. What I see with AI is disturbing in a lot of ways, but in this way for sure. Right now, AI is in a very similar place to where we were at the very beginning of the dot-com revolution, around the late 90s, and the very early days of crypto. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of young, intelligent people that have visions of enormous wealth that they're going to get from this. They're going to make fortunes. They're going to start up companies and become rich overnight. I see that happen. Is that an awful thing? No, it's not awful intrinsically, except in our current financial paradigm, which what I call extreme capitalism, there is sort of an unspoken rule that in modern American capitalism, the requirement and demand of any company to serve the shareholders' value above anything and everything else, all moral restraints, you name it, pick anything. No, shareholder value comes first. In that system, these kinds of situations where people see the opportunity to make billions of dollars in a few years, nothing good comes from it, right? Nothing good comes from it. And until we reform our capitalism and make it what we'll call a democratic capitalist system, where capitalism, which is a fantastic thing, is used in a way that's not destructive, we're going to continue to see that. But in AI, it gets even worse in a sense, because the dot-com revolution at least had the plus of generating a substantial number of jobs, a whole new industry, well-paying jobs, good jobs that invited people to go to school and get educated. AI is going to strip millions of jobs from people, and anyone that tells you otherwise on the media is lying to your face. It will create some jobs, but for everyone it creates, it'll take away 10, 20, 30. Or to put it another way, you may have a job, but you'll be sweeping the floor of a saloon somewhere. You won't be doing anything that has any meaning to you. So it is one more example of the fact that the human race, it suffers from an affliction which is really not, intentional so much, in that we are smart, we are constantly exploring, we are constantly learning, we value that, and we entered long ago the world of technology. And so we discover things and we create things, and we do it as fast as we can. We do this without regard to our moral IQ, our moral sophistication, worldview. We just do it, all right, no matter what the consequences. In other words, we do it because we can. And unfortunately, we haven't taken care of other matters. Doing what you can simply because you can is a luxury if you have your house in order. But if you have driven the population, a choice that we made from about 1.5 billion people at the end of the 19th century to 8 billion people heading for 10, the idea that you can just do what you want when you can is ludicrous. But we haven't figured that either. So we are in for an extremely painful time, and it's going to be more painful because, like Abby Hoffman said many years ago, this time the revolution will be on television. This time the suffering will be on television in 4K. And you mentioned the Ukraine disaster, where women and children are being slaughtered. You mentioned the Middle East, where on both sides women and children are being slaughtered. You left off one, because across North Central Africa, there is an absolute slaughter going on as
Totally.
a rebel army funded by I think Abu Dhabi, whatever the hell that country is, as well as the Wagner Group, is literally trying to create an Arab zone across North Africa, and they are killing every native African they can find. And creating a diaspora of millions, just like there's a diaspora of millions in the Gaza and so forth. That's one that's it's awful, but not awful enough to compete with the current ones. And there's more coming. And so we are really in deep trouble if the death and slaughter of millions and millions of innocent people bothers us. And it should bother us because, unlike Genghis Khan, who moved across Asia many, many centuries ago, he had a very strict policy that he followed. And he was asked about it from time to time, carefully, of course. Why do you kill everybody and leave virtually no one alive as you pass through? Because, he said, every child you leave alive behind will grow up and want vengeance upon you And so we don't even allow them to live. That's not happening now. We're doing all kinds of slaughter, but we're not slaughtering everybody. And as a result, we are creating the children of this disasters, and they are going to want revenge, and they're going to get it one way or another. And so we have a cycle of revenge and destruction all set up and ready to go throughout the rest of the 21st century. Okay. So with that positive news out of the way, let's talk about something really positive. As it happens, as we enter into what some call the final phase of the end of civilization as we know it, the prelude to the nuclear war we've always wanted, and God knows what else is in store. The most profound event in human history is at hand. And while it's not the first time it's happened, the previous examples of this occurred in ancient days, thousands of years ago, where extraterrestrials engaged this planet as they wished. But obviously, the people of the time were not part of a global high-tech civilization that already was spacefaring. And so the ancients viewed them as gods and dealt with them that way. And it was all very interested. And we have a record of it, and eventually we'll know more about it. This is different. This is not that. We're in the modern time in which not only is a high-tech global civilization going to learn that it's not alone in the universe. I say learn, it's going to be confirmed to it at the highest levels, it's not alone in the universe, but it is being engaged, and there are technologies involved, which are transformative. And this fact that this is breaking now may be our way out of this mess. It's not just another thing. Oh, we're going to learn there's extraterrestrials here. Well, that's great. Now I need to get back to, making billions of dollars or slaughtering people in Northern Africa. No. This may be the door out of this mess, which is why this movement is almost transcendent in its importance. Okay. So, for the last 76 years, a lot of people have been working hard to convince the United States government to confirm what they learned in 1947 latest, that we are not alone. We're being engaged by non-human tech, non-humans. They have not been successful, but they're about to be. It took 76 years to get to where we are, right? And where we are is that due to the coming forward of 10 individuals in 2017, October of 2017, 10 individuals who all had careers in the military intelligence complex where our security is maintained and held in high secrecy. These 10 individuals, which included Louis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and Gary Nolan and Steve Justice and others, basically represents and represented the growing sentiment within the military intelligence complex amongst a lot of very good people, which, by the way, our military intelligence complex is overwhelmingly filled with very good people who want to serve and want to protect the country, not a bunch of evil demons or the minions of the Illuminati, right? These kinds of extreme views do not help at all. They are representing the fact that the sentiment had shifted to the point where even the military intelligence complex, or at least the employees therein, really wanted this truth embargo to end. And they wanted this out. They wanted people to know this. They knew it was that important. And they came forward in October. And this triggered a process now 6 years on, which will lead very soon to that confirmation of the ET presence. That process really went into what we'll call the second phase, the second act of a two-act play 3 years ago, when the first legislation ever regarding UAP was put into, passed by the Congress and signed by the president in December of 2020. That legislation was sponsored by a Republican, Marco Rubio, at the time was the chairman of the Senate Intel Committee. Since then, 3 significant pieces of legislation, all embedded in the National Security Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, rather, one of the most important acts that we pass every year. 3 consecutive tranches of legislation have passed, developing a structure, a scaffolding about which what is about to happen can take place. And the 4th tranche, which is now heading to reconciliation, as you mentioned, is even more powerful than the first 3. And if it passes unredacted or not seriously redacted in late December, then the entire scaffolding will be in place for a disclosure event to occur in which the President of the United States can comfortably and nonpartisanly come forward, certainly in front of the world, in front of the media, probably in the White House, in the East Room, and confirm that the evidence presented shows that we're not alone and that we do have a non-human presence here and that we know quite a bit about it. And the president is going to see to it that we learn a lot more. That will be called the disclosure event, capital D. I predict it can and should happen in January of next year, which is about 4 or 5 weeks, 5 weeks after the legislation is passed and a few weeks after, maybe 1 week after the hearings are held, which have been promised now for 6 months in the Senate Intel Committee. That's where the hearing will be held. It wasn't supposed to be in a House subcommittee. It was supposed to be in the Intel Committee, but things got a little off track. No problem. We're back on track now. All right. So that is what is unfolding. To put a point on how important this act is, the first legislation was sponsored by Marco Rubio, chairman of the Intel Committee. The second legislation, and a presidential candidate. The second in a Senate legislation was sponsored by Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democratic member of the Intel Committee and a presidential candidate. And the third was sponsored by the chairman of the Intel Committee under a new president, and that was Mark Warner. Right, and these are major people.
I just delineate quickly for everyone. What did the Rubio and the Gillibrand legislations put in place? Because what you're saying is really important, that the infrastructure for disclosure is now being scaffolded.
Yes.
And so start with Rubio and just lead us through exactly what has been put in place. And then obviously we'll describe what's currently the final piece of the scaffold.
Yes, and let me put a preface on that, in that there is a very significant misconception in the general public right now. I'm not blaming anybody, and it is I think I'm the only one speaking to this. I may not be, but I think I am. I've already done scores of podcasts. I've got 17 more set up, and I'll continue to speak to this. But it's not being brought forward. It's not. I've written an op-ed. They won't publish it. The Washington Post is not going there. The New York Times is not going there. None, the News Nation, none of the media is going there. They're covering this. Oh my God, the articles are pouring forward about this process, but they're not addressing this misconception, and it is a big misconception. Everything that gets underway in Act 2, which again starts with that legislation that I referred to, sponsored by Marco Rubio, basically a 3-year process, is not about putting together the means by which the government can finally determine what this thing is in the sky and what these other phenomena are. It is not about that at all. But most everybody thinks that's what it's about. And therefore, as they assess this, it's extremely odd. It's confusing. It doesn't make any sense, and it shouldn't make any sense. It's not about that at all. It hasn't been from the beginning. What is being put together has two fundamental purposes and a side purpose. The fundamental purpose is to get everything in place so that when the president does confirm the extraterrestrial presence, and the entire world, including everyone in the United States, is going to immediately stand outside of every, of the White House and in the Department of Defense, and every reporter is going to be jamming every one of the briefing rooms, demanding a massive amount of information, and this and that and everything else, that they have the structure in place to begin to service the demand that starts the very day after that confirmation comes. If they don't have that, and somehow the president was forced to disclose the extraterrestrial presence, say 3 years ago, possibly because they learned through their intelligence that Xi Jinping was about to do it himself, and the last thing they wanted was China to lead on this, then the president would have had to suddenly announce there's an ET presence. All hell would break loose, and they've got nothing in place, no legislation, no structure, no entities, no nothing. It is set up to serve the post-disclosure world. That's the first purpose. The second purpose is to get to disclosure, meaning The president coming out in the East Room and announcing and confirming an extraterrestrial presence is no easy thing to do. It has all kinds of attached issues and problems. And it has to be done in such a way that is not going to make things worse, only make them better. And by doing all of this preparation, by setting all of this structure up, and then by providing extremely powerful, convincing testimony, mostly from former members of military who have taken oaths to serve in front of the most important committee in Congress with hundreds of millions of people watching. Think Watergate times 10, right? In terms of interest globally and that hearing. By doing that, they literally serve the issue up to the White House. And the White House can say, well, look, how can we deny what we have just heard? I, your president, am as convinced as you are now, and then I can disclose. It is to make it possible for you to do it in that way. And then the side collateral purpose, right? And I think it's worth mentioning, is that the United States government, every government, but particularly the United States government, does have a public relations problem that's rather unprecedented. It is going to have to confirm something that the government, through every means possible, at enormous expense, and that's doing things that are not particularly nice, is going to have to confirm we've been lying to you the entire time, all 75 years, in every way possible, right? We have been lying, misrepresenting, and they're going to have to acknowledge that. And not 50 years later, like the Tuskegee experiments or some of these other awful things they do, but the next day. And so by doing all the right things now and doing it in an appropriate way and setting things up for a nonpartisan, constructive disclosure event, they're hoping the public, particularly the millennials and Gen Zers, will go, hey, forgive and forget. Let's move forward. The past is prologue. The past is a bucket of ashes, as Ogden Nash would say. So that is what is going on. Is anybody saying this anywhere in media? No, it's just little old me. All right. But it's okay. It's all right. I have podcasts, and the podcast world loves me because I will do one on 2 minutes notice. So I've gotten that point out of the way. So the structure, what we had to do.
Lead us through starting with Rubio.
Starting with Rubio. The first thing they had to do was they had to set up a formal office. All right. Something that was formal instead of the nebulous spread, stuff that's kind of spread out through the military intelligence world, mostly fully classified. They had to set up a public-facing office for the first time, and they called it the UAP Task Force. It had sort of initially been, unofficially, been sitting over at the Naval Office of Naval Intelligence, the ONI, just kind of sitting there. But they gave it a formal structure, called it the UAP Task Force, and they put somebody in charge of it. A gentleman by the name of Bray and Mon-Fri. And they also hired somebody. I mean, there was I think a staff. I think somebody said there was only one staffer, might have been two. Again, it's simply a structure that's being created to be there, not to really do anything. One of those people that was on the staff was a gentleman by the name of Major David Grush. So they set that up. But then they did something else, right? Again, this is part of showing the flag, showing the faith. The legislation required that the Department of Defense would deliver a report, a public report, I think on June 25th, no later than June 25th, and a classified report to the Intel Committee, to the Congress, but through the Intel Committee about, just the status of things, right? Just a report of some kind, which was a strategic move. Because if you set a date for the Department of Defense to deliver something to the Congress and the public, that's like just waving a red flag in front of a bull in terms of the media. I mean, that gets the media's attention. I mean, boom, they just jump in. This is going to happen on this date. And as the date approaches, more and more media, and that was intentional. They drew the media into the issue. And so ultimately, this report comes through. The public report was no big deal for people that understand the issue, but at least it happened. The classified report was probably more extensive, but of course, we didn't know about that. And I should add that and the reason that Rubio was able to take this action and put that language in and get that bill signed in December of 2020 is in the previous 2 years, led by a gentleman by the name of Christopher Mellon, who had a national security background, both on the Hill as well as at the Department of Defense. They had been taking witnesses up on the Hill for private briefings of members of Congress for maybe as much as 2 years. Private. How many, we don't know. Probably scores and scores of meetings of certain members of Congress, of certain committees, Intel, Armed Services, and so forth. And so they were already filling up the heads of many members of Congress with very important information in private meeting, not skiffs, but private meetings, to educate these people so that when legislation was proposed, it would be approved. It would be fine. And so the Congress was already on a fairly substantial learning curve and well ahead of the public by the time Rubio takes his step. All right. And so now information comes in because of that legislation, more information to the Congress. And so what was happening over a period of about 3 years, right up and through that report that came in on January 25th of 2021, is that the brains of quite a few members of Congress, particularly in the areas of national security, were slowly filling up with an understanding about what is going on here, that it's real, and certain particulars about it. And they're learning it firsthand from mostly military witnesses. So that's going on. So that legislation goes down. Year goes by. A lot of press. The press coverage for the last year has been a couple of years has been unprecedented. Thousands of articles. I've triaged about 3,000 over the last 4 years, legitimate articles about this in mainstream media. So Gillibrand comes in with the second area of legislation. And what that does is one of the things it does is it creates another office and moves it out of the Naval Office of Naval Intelligence and over into where it should be, which is the Department of Defense. And they gave it another name, which nobody else is going to ever remember, had the worst acronym of all time, and gave it some additional duties and talked about funding. So in other words, it solidified the idea of an entity. It's going to be in the basis of it's going to be based in the DoD. And I believe they also made it clear that this office was non-trivial because this was going to report to the Secretary of Defense, and I believe the head of the Office of National Intelligence, right? The Director of National Intelligence, DNI. And so that was very sophisticated. That was very significant, gave it substance. I think it asked for another report or something. So more structure was done, more press coverage. And of course, during that year, more briefings were taking place behind the scenes. Most of what is about to transpire, most of what has happened leading up to what is about to happen, it's like an iceberg. Most of it was behind the scenes, right? Not in the public eye. A limited amount was in the public eye. A lot of it was covered by the press, to be sure, but most of it is behind the scenes. Nobody should be surprised at this, all right? And so another year goes by, and it's time for the third tranche of legislation. Now, this was sponsored by Warner, and this is when things started getting real. What the third tranche of legislation got into, absolutely necessary, was addressed the absolutely necessary processes by which witnesses can come forward within the proper channels on this issue, how they could do it, what protections they have, how it would be handled, and so forth. Because you can't have hearings, strong hearings with very powerful witnesses if you don't know who they are. They've got to come forward. Now, some people had already come forward, but the government is very well aware that there are thousands of people who have been working on the UAP issue, right? The ET issue as well, since the 40s, thousands. And so there's a lot of people that technically could come forward. And so they wanted to grease the skids. And that's what that act did. And it starts to set up processes of the transfer of information within the proper channels, but openly acknowledging this, all right? And this act had one thing in it of note. I mean, we could go into the act, but that would take quite a while. But there's one thing in this act that makes the point that needs to be made. And that is, and by the way, for those that don't follow how legislation is made in the United States, the Senate comes up with a language and puts it up on their website. And the House comes up with language and puts it up on its website. And that language sits there for months until it gets reconciled and then signed by the president. Okay, why is that important? It's important because whatever the outcome of the final bill is, the intent of the Senate and the House is there for everybody to read, to see. Everybody, every American citizen, every member of the Navy and the Army and the DoD, everybody. It's on the internet. You can watch it from Korea if you want to. And so whatever the final outcome is, the intent is there. It sends a message. Even if it doesn't get passed, it sends a message. This is where we're going, folks. And so when that went up, where it sat for months, there was a section in that bill sponsored by Warner, the chairman of the committee, co-chairman with still Marco Rubio. It said that any witnesses trying to bring forward UAP ET related information within the channels as per the legislation, who are harassed or impeded by anybody within their offices or within government at all, that was illegal. They could not do that. And I'm going, well, that's good. That's very good. Thank you. And then the next paragraph said, and this absolutely stunned me, if you are harassed or if you are impeded or harmed in any way by someone within your offices or within the government as part of this process that we are legislating, you can sue that person. In other words, if you are a member of the Air Force and your commander gives you a hard time and threatens you with losing your flight privileges, you can sue your commander. And then it adds, you can sue the government itself. And I'm thinking, no. Our government goes to tremendous lengths to prevent people from suing it, I assure you. Try it sometime. And there it was in black and white. And I said, my Lord. Well, guess what? When the bill was reconciled, that second paragraph was removed. But the message was sent. All right, we are serious about this. If you think this is some sort of trick or ploy to extend the truth embargo another 10 years, you need to think again. And so that is one of the highlights of the third tranche of legislation. And then comes the fourth tranche, and that's when things get really serious. I'll be as quick as I can. Here is how it unfolds. Because this process has been stretched out over time due to rather unusual circumstances taking place in the House and Senate, particularly the House on Capitol Hill, some rather bizarre politics, which is very distracting and consuming of the media, things stretched out, plus a war posing a serious threat of a nuclear event was distracting, and other things. It just made it difficult to focus on something of this magnitude. It's something so powerful, so important, that you just don't want to try to do it in the middle of chaos. You want at least a window of opportunity. So it stretched it out. And because it stretched it out, it opened up the door for unforeseen things to happen, which would complicate the process. Hey, call it history. That's the way things are. And that unforeseen event was David Grush. Essentially, David Grush, when he was working for the UAP task force under the legislation passed by Rubio in 2020, his job was to address the issue and be a catcher's mitt for possibly information coming in from other parts of the government. That's, technically, that's what the UAP task force was set up to do, though they didn't want it to do it. And they really didn't want that to happen, but still it was set up for that. So not surprisingly, some people got in touch with Grush. People inside very high classified programs got in touch with Grush and told him, essentially in confidence and within the chain of command, that in case you didn't know it, David, we've got multiple crash vehicles that aren't human made, and we have the bodies of the pilots. Now, Grush then goes, holy cow, and sets about getting in touch with various people that he knew because he had been in the geospatial office. He had a high clearance. And so he had a lot of contacts, and he's calling here and there and everything. And he's the task force guy, and he's saying, look, I was told this. And he was getting responses along the lines of, yeah, that's right. That's right. And so he realizes, my God, this is real, and I'm part of the UAP task force, and I just learned this, and this is incredible, and I need to pass this on. And so he goes through the channels to the appropriate entities, the Senate Intel Committee. Well, that was ahead of the plan. That was a little soon. That really wasn't supposed to get out yet. And so they probably said something along, thank you, David. We appreciate this. This is important information. Absolutely. We're considering it. And he goes back to his office at the task force and goes, well, I've done my job. And then all of a sudden, he's having problems. He's getting threats. He's getting harassed because he got ahead of his skis. He didn't know that. And this guy is kind of he's a patriot. He's a serious man. He's been through two terms in Iraq. And he said, wait a minute, I'm not putting up with this. And so he files a complaint with the Inspector General of the intelligence community, a very important Inspector General, meaning this is not acceptable to me. I didn't do anything wrong. I passed important information on. Now, in another time, he would have been quickly shuttled aside, put in another job, probably in Alaska, and the whole thing would have been forgotten. We're in a different time. And so what did happen is that the first Inspector General of the intelligence community, McCullough, steps forward and says, I will represent you in your complaint to the current Inspector General of the intelligence community. And guess what? His complaint was received and it was acted upon, and efforts were taken to cool the jets, whoever was bothering David Grush. David Grush also went to Arrow, or tried to go to Arrow, assuming that that was also appropriate. But what David didn't understand, the Arrow was not set up to resolve the ET issue. It wasn't set up to find out what's going on. It was set up to exist, to just be there when disclosure comes. It was a Potemkin village. And so Arrow could not respond to it. And that bothers him.
Arrow, for everyone, is the all-domain anomalous
resolution office, which for the last year has been run and directed by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And so Grush is getting very upset. And so what happened is that he made a decision, a life-changing decision. He decided to be what the real first, very public. I think there have been others that have said this, but they really have in no way gotten to the public level that Grush went to. He literally arranges to come forward publicly as a whistleblower to bring this information out, at the same time declaring that the fundamental truth embargo was against the law. It was illegal. That makes him a true whistleblower. And he does it well. He gets Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, a Pulitzer Prize winner, to do the article. They couldn't get it in the major media because he wanted it done immediately. And the major media was not going to rush a story like that. I don't blame them. No problem. But the debrief took it on. No problem with that either. Love the debrief. They've done fantastic work. They published the article on June the 5th, and an interview is already scheduled for that same day with a new news entity that's going to become very big. It's called News Nation, heavily funded, trying to find a more centrist but yet left-right-leaning organization that does news and not propaganda. And he gives an interview to one of the best journalists in this issue, Ross Coulthart, and says it all on a camera. Boom. And this is June the 5th. In other words, what did he do? He dropped right into the public space the fact that he personally has confirmed with 20 or 30 people information from members of unacknowledged special access programs that we have multiple crashed extraterrestrial vehicles and the bodies of the pilots, which immediately confirms Roswell, which immediately confirms that the government has known about the ET presence since 1947 latest, which confirms what I was saying earlier, that there's no way what is going on now is about trying to understand what's going on. They have always known. So this is one giant matzo ball he just served up to the world. Okay. Whoa. That happens on June the 5th. Now what? I mean, you have the legislation that's moving forward. Everything seems to be in order. Arrow exists. People are happy. The journalists are covering it. And all of a sudden, boom, bodies and technology, non-human technology? Well, let me tell you, a lot of smart people, they had to adjust, they had to deal with it. And here is how it got dealt with. And this is again, if you climb a ladder high enough and get to a vantage point, you can see these things. Not everybody has the time or the ladder to do that. That's my job as an activist. I've got nothing else to do, and I have got a ladder. And so you climb up the top of that ladder to a vantage point, and you look down and you see the larger picture, which allows you to convey to the people, this is what's going on. You're down there working with your life, seeing this odd article here. You do not understand the larger picture, and that's going to make it hard for you to support or address this historic event that's taking place. So how did it get dealt with? 39 days after Grush goes public on News Nation and the debrief, none other than Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of the Senate, one of the gang of 8, the most important people in Congress that deals with national security issues, steps forward and saying, I am putting some language in this next bill, in addition to whatever language is being put in by the bill's sponsor, which is ultimately Senator Reid. I'm putting some language in. And people, well, he didn't have to. He didn't have to do that. He could just sit back and let the Senate Intel Committee write what they wanted. Now, I'm putting some language in the bill. Oh, okay. What language is that, Senator Schumer? The language covered several points, but the one that got the world's attention, the one that's incredibly important, is he says there will be language in this bill in which the United States government declares eminent domain over any non-human technology and bodies, frankly, in the hands of any public person or corporation. Now, that doesn't apply to foreign corporations. He's not declaring eminent domain of some ET tech in the hands of China or Russia, but just United States. Not eminent domain over stuff in the government already, something in a classified program. It's already in the government. You don't declare eminent domain about something the government already has. It's eminent domain of things the government doesn't have. And what would that be? Very simple. Aside from some PFC guy who grabbed a piece of wreckage and took it home with him and then retired from the military and has been, got it on a nice display in his basement and brags about it when he has people over for a beer party. We're talking about government defense contractors who, as we know, are given contracts to do all manner of work for the government in the area, certainly of defense, submarines, nuclear weapons, all kinds of stuff, airplanes, and ET technology, which Ben Rich alluded to. And by the way, it was non-trivial that one of the people that came forward in 2017 to the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences was none other than a director of the Skunk Works, Steve Justice. And everybody knows that Lockheed was one of the major companies that was dealing with ET tech. So he just sent a message to the entire defense contractor industry and corporations, in case you didn't know it, anything you have still, anything you have derived from non-human technology we have given to you to research belongs to the government. If you think the day after disclosure, you're going to file 500 patents on it and trademarks and start rubbing your hands together of the trillions of dollars you're going to make, forget about it. You may benefit from that technology, but it will be at the discretion of the United States government, which owns that technology. That was the first thing that statement achieved. But if you have a vantage point on this issue, you noted something else that it achieved. If there is no non-human technology, if there are no non-human bodies in the hands of USAP programs, as Grush proclaimed, why in the hell would the Senate Majority Leader come forward and say we're declaring eminent domain over it? That would be ridiculous. It would be insane. And so what he did in that instance, he said David Grush, who was still getting problems, he was still having a lot of problems. They released his medical records. Sean Kirkpatrick got a little verklempt and sent a very nasty letter, and I'll talk about that in a second. If there is nothing there, he has nothing to say. And by doing that, the Senate Majority Leader confirmed to the world that David Grush was telling the absolute truth. That was the second thing that he accomplished there, right? And the third thing he accomplished after being silent for 3 solid years was, you know, my colleagues over at the Senate Intel Committee, God bless them, I'm down with it. Like what they're doing, like that legislation, like what they're saying, all that stuff regarding the ET stuff. I'm totally down with it. Go ahead, folks. I got your back. Right? That's the third thing he did in that. Now, that was 39 days after Grush came forward, and he did that, put that out there. And that language sits up there and has sat on the website for months, and it will remain there until the reconciliation is over. And so it doesn't matter whether the House pulls that language out as part of the negotiation. I mean, the eminent domain language. Doesn't matter. The message has been sent, right? Clear as it could be to every single civilian entity in our classified world that has any tech like that. It is ours. And so while the language is not there, understand we're coming for that. It may be in the next bill. The message has been sent. This is often how government works. And that happened 39 days on July the 14th. Now, guess what happens next? With all of that moving forward, the House of Representatives made a decision, at least one committee, the House Oversight Committee, that there has been way too much attention on the Senate and the Senate Intel Committee, and we're not a bunch of potted plants down here. We're an important part of the United States government as well, and so we want in on this, and we really haven't done much. Andre Carson held a briefing, not a hearing. Ruben Gallego provided a little language. He was a member of the House, but overall, it's pretty much been a Senate thing, and they said, no. As it happened, a gentleman by the name of Tim Burchett, Congressman from Tennessee, had gotten information. I don't think he was briefed because he was not on a committee, I think, that would have gotten briefed, but I could be wrong. But one of the Capitol Hill, for those who don't know it, is a giant cafeteria where everybody gets together underground in the basement of these buildings and gossips. And so whatever the hell's going on, somehow or another, it gets around. All right. And so Tim Burchett got the word. He figured out, yeah, this is all real, which is why prior to Grush coming forward, he had gone on in front of cameras 4, 5, 6, 8 times saying there's an ET presence. We've got technology. I mean, he literally was pounding that issue. And so not surprisingly, Tim Burchett moved very quickly to convince the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, we should have a hearing. And Comer agreed. And they set up a hearing for the subcommittee of the Oversight Committee, because that committee did have a national security mandate of sorts, which made it appropriate. And so in the matter of just 10 days, they pulled a hearing together for the House of Representatives. And the reason they were able to pull it off, because it wasn't supposed to happen, was David Grush. David Grush was a whistleblower. He came forward. His job is get this out, get it out far and wide, because I don't want to be harassed anymore. I'm being threatened. My wife is being threatened. Enough of this. And so I want it out. And so when he was approached, I'm sure by the subcommittee, that we want to have a hearing, he said yes immediately. And the moment he said yes, they almost certainly were going to get a Graves and Fravor, which gave them a nice hearing with 3 former members of the Air Force, with Grush in the center, testifying under oath what he said to Ross Coulthard and what was written up in the debrief, under oath, under penalty of serious prison time. Everything he said, and he went even further, because in a hearing under oath, there's little things that you can do that are significant, like this, right? And by the way, it's all on camera and it's been seen all over the world, is that you're asked questions, and if you can't answer the question directly for classified reasons, you simply say, I cannot speak to this in open session. And obviously, if you're asked a question about something important, and you say you can't speak in an open session, you're acknowledging the question has validity. But he went even further. There was a moment there which I think he stepped over the line, but nobody said anything. Anna Paulina Luna, questioning Grush, says this. I mean, this is how absurd this is getting in a way, which is why it needs to get over as quickly as possible. Representative Luna says, Mr. Grush, you stated that we have non-human bodies and non-human saucers and craft. Do you know where they are? Do you know the locations of where these craft are? And his answer was, yes, but I can't tell you the exact locations in open setting, but I'll be happy to tell you in a skiff. Okay, well, so what did he just say? He basically says, not only do we have these crash vehicles, I know where they are. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Again, this is kind of inside baseball, but I love talking about it. Naturally, the subcommittee wanted to get in a skiff with David Grush and find out the locations of these vehicles. I don't blame them. God bless them. But when they went to get the skiff, the DOD wouldn't give them a skiff, right? And so they were really angry. And some people took that wrong. It's like, oh, the DOD is finally halting this thing. They're going to push back. This is over. They're not going to let this go forward. No, not at all.
And they also, didn't they took away Grush's security clearance to get into a skiff.
That I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
And if that is true, I'd like a link on that, Jim. If that is true, I'd like a link on that. Not that, given that he is coming forward and given that he was no longer in the UAP task force, they have every right to take the security clearance away. But if they did that, it wasn't a Grush thing. It was this. This wasn't supposed to happen.
Exactly.
But Grush did what he did. And so the Department of Defense was making a decision that this information it was not appropriate for this information to go to some of the people that were going to be in that skiff. That doesn't mean that everybody would have been in that skiff was appropriate, but it just meant that at least one person that was going to be in that skiff, this was not appropriate for that person to get that information. Therefore, there would be no skiff. All right. And because that information was to go to the Intelligence Committee. And so if the Intelligence Committee had asked for a skiff with respect to Grush, I think they would have gotten it. But they weren't going to do that because the Intelligence Committee didn't want Grush to be out there at all. That's okay. Be assured that when the Intel Committee finally holds that hearing, which I hope to God is in January, Grush will be one of the witnesses. And so that's what happens in that segment. So all of that is happening prelude to what is about to take place, the passing of this legislation.
There's a question, Steve, about a skiff. It's a secure facility that allows people to speak without being eavesdropped by electronic surveillance.
It is a completely sealed place where there is no way to use any technology to learn what is going on. And it stands for Secure Information. I've always had trouble. SCIF. So that takes us up to
Secure and Controlled Information Facility.
There you go. That takes us up to pretty much the present time, and now it gets to be tough, and where I get a little worked up. So the legislation is pending for reconciliation. I believe that given the circumstances in the House, which is focused elsewhere, to be sure, and if there's going to be any serious upheaval in the House, it will not be over the NDAA bill. It will be over the funding bill, which the funding of the government has been pushed forward another number of weeks into January, and in which time it'll come up again. And I'm in agreement with a couple of pundits that commentarists on the news that I think Mike Thompson, the new speaker, is going to defund the government. He's not going to let that bill pass. And the reason he's going to do that is because if he does allow the bill to go forward, he will probably lose his job very quickly. But by not passing that bill and defunding the government for a length of time, he will have established his credentials. Fine, that's his business. Has nothing to do with the ET issue, but it definitely focuses the House elsewhere. And so the idea that the House is going to exert influence on this bill and reconciliation, I think, is small. And there's another reason. The level of public attention is great. And this is the NDAA bill. This is the National Defense Authorization Act, which is national security. And by and large, the Republicans are not the party that likes to muck with the national security. It's basically whatever the Department of Defense wants. And so for them to push back against this in that act is not in their interest. I mean, they're just irritating the Department of Defense, and they're raising national security issues, which are not appropriate. And so I think it's going to pass completely unredacted. Danny Sheehan, who is obviously the head of the New Paradigm Institute, which you work for, Jim, he's deep into this. He's up on the Hill. He's watching every little maneuver, and he has some concerns, and that's appropriate. He's a little worried that maybe it might get scuttled. I'm always listening to Danny. My assessment is no, it won't be. So the bill is going to be passed. And so as we enter, and then of course everybody's going to go home for Christmas. As we go into January, the bill is passed, 4 tranches of legislation. And then one other thing has happened, which is again being misinterpreted. But from my vantage point, here is what I believe has taken place. Sean Kirkpatrick is going to step down at the end of the year as the head of Arrow. Why? Sean Kirkpatrick just had the worst year of his life. He's a good man. He's a patriot. He's a good man, brilliant man, fine man. He was given the job to run Arrow. Whether he knew how tough it was going to be, I don't know. How well informed he was when he took that job, I don't know. But he took it. And the job was this. Arrow has to have a head. You're it. Arrow is not going to do anything, but it needs to look like it's doing something. It's not going to get any funding, but it needs to do what he can. You need to, I don't know, set up the filing cabinets, establish some relationships, get some people in the Rolodex, whatever, but get ready for the big show that's coming after disclosure. That's what Arrow is supposed to do. If anybody comes to you and say, oh, you're the head of Arrow, we have a number of anomalous phenomena we'd like to talk to you about. Or if somebody comes to you and say, Dr. Kirkpatrick, what do you think about the statements by Grush? He doesn't want to deal with any of that. Absolutely not. He can't go there. He can't say anything to that. He's in an impossible situation. And so he for the one entire year, he was playing arrow catcher and spear catcher from all of the disaffected public and social media, wanting to know what the hell is going on. And why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? He just had to be the mayor of this Potemkin village. That is not a dignified position for a man with a stellar career, but that's what he had to do. And he only made one serious mistake. And that is when Grush came forward, putting him into an absolutely impossible position. Meaning, oh my God, please don't come over here and ask me about what Grush just said. He got angry and he fired back a letter pushing back against Grush, hoping that would distance himself from Grush's testimony and minimize a lot of attention directed towards Arrow. It was a mistake. He should have remained absolutely silent and done the best he could in that regard. No problem. Totally forgiven. But guess what? If disclosure is imminent, and if disclosure takes place, that's when Arrow goes into hyperdrive. That's when the money turns up and Arrow becomes a major component of the structure that's been set up by particularly the last piece of legislation. And I forgot to add this, probably the most important part of the last bill, if you read all 63 pages of it, is this. Aside from the eminent domain, what that bill does, and I'm generalizing here, is that it essentially sets up a process which is designed to get every single piece of information and document in the government's hands, no matter how deep the classification, into a pipeline in which it is reviewed and considered and then move forward for further review and consideration so that ultimately it ends up in the National Archives. Not just, John Greenwald's Black Vault, right? Or some website on the FBI site. No, in the National Archives, everything. As far as the technology, well, I assume the original tech will end up in the Smithsonian Museum, okay? Meanwhile, the sons and daughters of that tech will be flying around in the sky, and we'll be getting to Europe in like 20 minutes. The point is that that's it. That's what it is designed to do. Not tomorrow, but basically this is the process in which it all starts way down there and ends up in the archives. What they're saying is in this act, without saying it, is that look, this is very big deal. This is not a trivial matter. And we are committed that you will learn everything about it eventually. Everything. You're going to know the docs. You're going to know the history of the truth embargo. And unless the documents have been destroyed in a convenient fire, you're going to be able to go to the archives and read them. We'll probably put them all up on the internet. You're going to know everything eventually. And we have set up the process for this. What more could we want? I mean, people would like it all tomorrow. But that's not the way it's going to happen. But I can assure you, there is so much information about the truth embargo and the ET issue in the hands of the government that it will be coming forward in a steady stream for the rest of our lives. And we will have plenty to rejoice about and deal with. And the post-disclosure war will move forward quite nicely. That was in the bill. And unless one reads the bill, they don't get it. They even gave it a name. They called it the controlled disclosure process. And by the way, the name of this last act leading up to disclosure, the name of the bill is the UAP Disclosure Act. I mean, come on, right? The UAP Disclosure Act. Now, I'm not going to take credit for it. I'm not the only one that's pushed. I am the one that came up with the idea of capital D disclosure, the confirmation moment from the president, but other colleagues have been talking about disclosure, small d, and using that term because it's a good term and it's not a corrupted term. They didn't have to call it that. They call it that to send a message. Hey guys, we're on your side now. So that is done. Now comes the ultimate decision. I mean, we're talking history. There was a moment there in 64. When everybody sensed that that bill was going to get passed and Johnson was going to sign the Civil Rights Act, but it wasn't a certainty. And so they're in anticipation of it. Will the bill get passed? And then will Johnson sign it, right? And this was a big deal for millions of people. I'm not trying to be, I'm not no way diminishing that moment, but this time right now is far greater than that. The entire world is sitting here, whether they realize it or not, in this moment. Is this bill going to pass? Will it be signed? But more importantly, will the president disclose? Now that everything is in place, will the president disclose? Because that is where this is going. And there's a lot riding on it. It's hard to even describe what is riding on this. And what do I mean? And where is history right now? In 1964, it's basically resting on the Senate Majority Leader and the House Majority Leader and President Johnson. And it all worked out well, okay? This time, it really rests on the shoulders of two men. It happens to be two men. Other shoulders are involved, but the two sets of shoulders I'm talking about belong to Mark Warner and Marco Rubio, the co-chairs of the Senate Intel Committee. The president is not going to come out in the East Room and confirm the extraterrestrial presence until there has been a hearing of great magnitude, not the one we just had, but the Senate Intel Committee that Gillibrand promised months ago, in which extremely powerful witnesses like Grush, and even more powerful than that, sit down for a week in front of the Senate Intel Committee, morning and afternoon sessions, one after another, and lay out information that absolutely locks it down and convinces anybody with reasonable common sense and who isn't a skeptic, literally a professional skeptic, that obviously we're not alone. He cannot do that until that hearing is held. Once the hearing is held, the president can do it the next day, the day after they end. And so everything now rests on Rubio and Warner calling that hearing. Now, there has been rumors, but they haven't made the announcement yet. Now, I think there was some intent to hold those hearings earlier this year, but this year turned out to be a little bit too much. And so they delayed it. At some point, then it became logical. All right, we're not going to hold the hearings until the legislation passes. That makes sense. All right, absolutely makes sense. And so that's December 21. Now, I don't know what the hell's coming next in the world, but I can assume it could be unbelievably awful. But we might get a break. We might get a few months in which the current crises don't become even bigger, or there's more crises added to it. And so the door is open for Warner and Rubio to call that hearing in January and get disclosure in January. Now, you may say, well, what's your rush, Steve? Why is it so important? Here is why it's important. This is what's at stake. The stakes cannot be bigger. We are entering what will be one of the most bizarre elections in the history of the United States, that starts off in a state of hyper-partisanship so bad, people are hiring security guards so they don't get executed in the street. It's going to be a fiasco. Okay. Also, we now have 4 or 5 major crises in the world which have forced the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists to move the clock to 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. We're sitting on the cusp of a nuclear war. It could happen tomorrow. Could have already happened during this presentation, as far as I know. We're sitting on the edge of the volcano, and it could go off at any time. Right? So if that happens, there will be no disclosure. There will be no paradigm shift. We will just slowly sink into nothingness. Now, people say, well, look, maybe that'll happen, and maybe it won't, but what's the connection between disclosure and this? Why is there a connection at all? Here's the connection. This election has the potential to be one of the great political fiascos in American history, and the competition for that is really, really good. Or it could be one of the most significant elections in American history. Why? Because it's already started, but it gets underway around February, late February, March. Several thousand people are going to be, candidates are going to be running for all 35 seats in the House, 33 seats in the Senate, about 33, about, I don't know, 20, 30 governorships, and then a whole bunch of state Senate seats and state House seats, which are non-trivial, but just a couple thousand running for the federal offices. They're going to be running for federal office. And it's going to go 2 ways. If we get disclosure in January, every single one of those candidates, if they're serious, are going to be able to quickly go start reading some of these books behind me here that were written by a whole bunch of people, citizens, over the last 70 years, confirming the ET presence, while the government said there wasn't any ET presence. Citizen science research activists, journalists. Plus, they made a whole bunch of documentaries. So for those that are too busy to read, they can go watch documentaries for weeks. Just put YouTube, UFO in the YouTube search box, and up they come. And every single one of them could get a basic familiarity with the history of this issue and the truth embargo. Every single one of them. They may not be experts, and they could also, get in touch with some of the people like Richard Dolan and others and ask them to come and chat with them or whatever. In other words, they could get at least up to speed. And as they run for Congress and the Senate and the presidency too, they could answer intelligent questions about this, and the American people would be able to elect an entire House, a third of the Senate, the presidency, and a third of the governors of this country, knowing something about their view of the post-disclosure world that we're all then in. What do you think about this? How do you think we should respond to this new situation? It literally would incorporate and inculcate the ET issue into the next government, and the government would be transparent to the public. We have this opportunity. More importantly, this issue will provide the most hyper-partisan election, the most hyper-partisan candidates we've ever seen, a absolute nonpartisan issue of enormous importance that they can speak to without making asses of themselves. There is just no reason to make an ass of himself when addressing this ET issue, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it every, on numerous occasions. We're some of the most hyper-partisan people in media and politics, and I'll include Tucker Carlson here. Go in front of a camera with a guest and make intelligent, thoughtful statements and questions regarding this issue, because there is no reason to play the hyper-partisan game. And so it could departisanize to a great degree this election and make it far less awful than it's going to be. And then the other reason is this: we can get this issue in play finally, so that whatever the worldview implications are of the world having it confirmed to everyone, we are not alone in the universe, and there's a whole lot we need to know about that, and we'll soon know about that, and implications we can't even quite address. Everyone will have that knowledge in their head, whether they're just a citizen, or whether they're part of the Politburo, or whether they're part of the Chinese Communist Party, or whether they're sitting in the Pentagon. Everybody will know that is the truth as they decide what they're going to do about the crises that we are facing.
Exactly.
And whether or not they want to launch that tactical nuke in Ukraine, do some intercepts over airspace, fly some planes close to each other, run a mock attack on Taiwan to show how serious they are about getting that island back come hell or high water, and God knows what else. One act alone that could trigger the nuclear war that's going to put an end to all of this. This is the opportunity to inject into the world something that could significantly impact the fact that we have dug a hole so deep that a lot of people have given up on ever getting out of it. They're just building bunkers under very nice houses in New Zealand, and planning and stocking up food and planning for the post-apocalyptic world. That literally is where we're at. And somebody will say, "Oh, no, there are other things that could happen. There's some other stuff that could help there." And I'm going, what would that be? What would that be? Would you point to something? Tell me something that's going to literally alter worldview at a level that could impact the fact that we've got ourselves into multiple crises. Anyone could destroy us in a moment. Tell me what that is. Nobody's got anything. Nothing. Zero. Nada. In the UN? No. NATO? No. Nuclear weapons proliferation negotiations? There aren't any. Right? Nothing. Except this. But this doesn't happen unless that hearing is held in the Senate. And if that hearing is not held, there will be no disclosure from the president. And so that's what I mean when I say Mark Warner, Marco Rubio, senators. And I wish I could say this on CNN and MSNBC or an article in the New York Times, but they are not calling. History is standing on your shoulders, gentlemen. You must hold those hearings. That's where things are at, Jim.
Steve, that was an amazing tour de force of knowledge and perspective, and I think deep wisdom on this issue. So I really want to thank you for this. I think everyone we've had in just under 90 minutes a beautiful narration of what's happening, what's at stake, and what the immediate future needs to manifest if we're going to stay on the right track. And as Steve says, bring into the public domain an awareness that, if cultivated properly, which is the purpose of the New Paradigm Institute and what Steve is doing through his Paradigm Research Group and Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, how we then shape the narrative in a way that is constructive and effective. So, Steve, thank you for your time today. At another time down the trail, we'll talk more detail about the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance and your Paradigm Research Group. But today has been extraordinary.
The Hollywood Disclosure Alliance is basically a post-disclosure structure The New Paradigm Institute is basically a post-disclosure structure.
Yeah.
Gary Nolan is putting together a group called Soul, which is a post-disclosure structure. There are a lot of these things. I believe if you were able to get inside the enterprise, the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute, the Center for American Progress, and all these major think tanks, I think there's already discussions going on within them about how they're going to deal with the post-disclosure world, because they're think tanks as well. And so there's a lot happening. The preparation is there, but first we've got to get to disclosure so that humanity in a post-disclosure world will have a much more realistic opportunity to rise and not fall.
Steve Bassett, everyone. Thank you, Steve. That'll bring our session to a close. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. Steve, if you can join for a few minutes, that would be good. You received the link in your Zoom invite. And then we'll see everyone tomorrow for a 2-day program on the first Thanksgiving. Thank you, Steve.
All right.
See you. Bye for now.
All right.